Hello, hello everyone. It's always a little bit awkward on these live streams because I don't really know, you know, how people are reacting to, whether they can see me and hear me and all that stuff. But if you're here, I'm glad you're here. Thank you for tuning in. Um, my name is Kobi. I'm with Freedom Road Socialist Organization and the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. Um, and I'm gonna be talking about two of my favorite um, theoretical texts. Um, one of them is "I Write What I Like" by Steve Biko, and the other one is "Discourse on Colonialism" by Aimé Césaire. I don't have that second book, but it is available online. I can share a link in the chat. Um, and of course, don't forget to share this live stream. It really helps boost those analytics. Put it on your homepage, your Facebook. Share it on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Share it with all your people. Because we're trying to spread the knowledge. We're trying to spread that education. So I'm going to start with Biko. So for those who don't know, Steve Biko unfortunately was not a socialist, but he was a black nationalist in South Africa. And he did most of his work in the 60s and 70s, the late 60s, early 70s, until he was murdered by the apartheid governments. Very famously, they claim that he fell, he slipped, and he died while in custody. Obviously, nobody for a second believed that. Everyone knew that what they had done. And what I find really fascinating about Steve Biko is that he was doing all his writing and his organizing in this sort of in between period. What had just happened in the 1960s, in the early 60s, was the African National Congress, the ANC, the PAC, and of course the South African Communist Party were all banned by the apartheid government. There was the Rivonia Trials in 1964, in which Nelson Mandela was convicted. He was originally supposed to be he was put on a death sentence, which was changed to a sentence of life in prison. And after this sort of dismantling of the resistance movements, there was kind of a lull um, in activity, in anti-apartheid activity, and the the period that Steve Biko was writing in is just before the Soweto uprising in 1976, just before the explosion of urban rebellions and the resurgence of guerrilla activity against apartheid in South Africa. So it's just a really good read, to keep yourself hopeful in those times when you feel like there's no sort of resistance, and in those times when it seems like the white supremacist capitalist power structure feels invincible. You can just read Steve Biko's really sharp analysis, and see that it's not invincible, and that we can actually overcome it. So it was really hard for me to pick which passages and which essays to read, because this is a collection of essays written in the early 1970s, and every page I've kind of marked it up like uh, I might as well highlight the entire page, because there's just that much um, really really strong points in there. So I'm going to start with uh, Black Souls and White Skins. This essay was written in 1970. And it's a sort of refutation of the attitude that white liberals have toward the toward the anti-apartheid movement, and can be applied. Of course, like there are parts of it that are not really applicable, because not really applicable to situations outside of South Africa, but as a sort of a general analysis of a specific type of person who claims to be in favor of Black liberation, I think it's very universal. Um, there are a lot of people who claim to be anti-racist, who still operate within a sort of racist ideology, within a white chauvinist framework, and Steve Biko has a really good takedown of that. So uh, there's just a few quotes that I want to read through. On page 20, if you ever get this book and you somehow remember, the exact pages that I've been pointing people to, on page 20, Biko says, uh, the role of the white liberal in the black man's history in South Africa is a curious one. Very few black organizations were not under white direction. True to their image, the white liberals always knew what was good for the blacks and told them so. The wonder of it all is that the black people have believed them for so long. It was only at the end of the 50s that the blacks started demanding to be their own guardians. Nowhere is the arrogance of the liberal ideology demonstrated so well as their insistence that the problems of the country can only be solved by a bilateral approach involving black and white. And this this entire this entire essay, and in Steve Biko's entire body of work, what he's calling for is black self-determination, and not just the sort of paternalistic, white-led attitude on the part of white liberals, but actual solidarity and actual support of black-led movements, and that these black-led movements have to be independent and have to have the power of self-determination in order to actually get anything done. Um, so moving on in the same essay, I had some notes written down, but I'm kind of jumping all over the place. So on page 23, see the problem with putting too many highlights in a book is that you lose all the highlights. You forget which highlight was actually important to what you're about to talk about. But he kind of condemns the approach to anti-racism, which is that this sort of liberal, individualistic idea where people are just trying to prove how anti-racist they are, and trying to prove, how liberal they are, instead of actually doing work to deconstruct racism. So here's the quote. Instead of involving themselves in an all-out attempt to stamp out racism from their white society, liberals waste lots of time trying to prove to as many blacks as they can find that they are liberal. This arises out of the false belief that we are faced with a black problem. There is nothing the matter with blacks. The problem is white racism, and it rests squarely on the laps of the white society. So again, that's the instead of lecturing black people on how they can uh, improve their situation, what Steve Biko is telling these white liberals to do is look into their own communities, look at their own neighbors, and eradicate racism there, because that's where it stems from. especially in South Africa. For those who don't know, South Africa, was colonized by the British and the Dutch, and they had a policy, or they had many segregationist policies, and one of the main ones was the policy of land exclusion, basically land theft on the part of this white minority population, who took 87% of the land in the country for themselves, being around 10% of the population, and left 13% of the land to Black people. So, of course, that's a very urgent situation. And stemming out of that, there was all kinds of brutality, all kinds of massacres, and just like daily indignities being visited on Black people. So, of course, Steve Biko didn't just waste, didn't spend all his time just talking about white people. He had a program for Black people, a program of Black self-determination, a program of independence, Black thought, and struggle against colonialism that doesn't rely on white people and that doesn't work within systems created by white people. So there's another chapter about the Bantu Stands, which were basically where Black people were forced to live in South Africa, and these places were the apartheid government claimed that these places were going to be autonomous, and that Black people could have independence and self-determination within those places. But of course, they, these, first of all, the Bantu Stands were on the least arable land, the least farmable land in South Africa. And the apartheid government still maintained rights over the minerals that were under that land. So, these people were being put into land that was too small, that didn't have enough soil, that the soil couldn't support them. And they couldn't dig for minerals in their own land. So a lot of people came up with this, or a lot of people decided, to try and work within the system, to try and rally through the Bantu Stand system, and try and get some sort of favor with the apartheid government, and improve the lives of Black people that way. And Biko talks about that in Let's Talk About Bantu Stands. He says that I'm just gonna read the final quote, because I do want to try and save a little bit of time so that I can get through the Césaire reading. Above all, we Black people should all the time keep in mind that South Africa is our country and that all of it belongs to us. The arrogance that makes white people travel all the way from Holland to come and balkanize our country and shift us around has to be destroyed. So, that there, Steve Biko is directly challenging this idea of assimilationism, this idea that that there's any validity to a system of colonization, and that that Black people should be working within that system, instead of trying to get people to oppose it. So there was a chapter where he talks about how it was actually progressive for a time for the colored Labour Party in South Africa to actually run for governments on an anti-apartheid platform. So what they did was they used their campaign trying to get elected into the system to undermine the system. And I think that's the that's the idea that Biko is always pushing for something that you know that is against this system of injustice, that is against white supremacy, and it's for self-determination and progress for Black people. So the main thing that Steve Biko is known for, and I'll finish the Biko piece on this. The main thing that Steve Biko is known for is Black consciousness. He talks about the need for Black people to understand themselves independently of white history and independently of this European colonial way of understanding societies and culture and language. So I'm gonna just try and find a quick definition of Black consciousness. Or before I do that, this chapter is one of my favorite chapters, Black Consciousness and the Quest for a True Humanity. And we'll get into this a bit more with the Césaire reading about how colonialism dehumanizes both the colonizer and the colonized. And what for Steve Biko, Black consciousness was a way of regaining that humanity and rebuilding the humanity that was taken by colonialism. So I'm just going to read the final paragraph. Actually, on page 97, second to last page of this essay. The last step in Black consciousness is to broaden the base of our operation. One of the basic tenets of Black consciousness is totality of involvement. This means that all Blacks must sit as one big unit, and no fragmentation and distraction from the mainstream of events can be allowed. Hence, we must resist the attempts by protagonists of the Bantu Stands theory to fragment our approach. We are oppressed not as individuals, not as Zulus, Xhosas, Vendas, or Indians. We are oppressed because we are Black. We must use that very concept to unite ourselves and respond as a cohesive group. So, and then the final paragraph, we have set out on a quest for true humanity, and somewhere on the distant horizon we can see the glittering prize. Let us march forward with courage and determination, drawing strength from our common plight and our brotherhood. In time we shall be in a position to bestow upon South Africa the greatest gift possible, a more human face. So the purpose of Black consciousness is not just this sort of like narrowly defined idea of Blackness that the white power structure is okay with. It's about something that creates Black self-determination and something that directly challenges the white power structure. So I am gonna move on to the Césaire reading, Discourse on Colonialism by Aimé Césaire. And this, I've read this so many times, and every time I read it, something new jumps out at me. Aimé Césaire was a part of, or he was a Martiniquan poet who was a part of this, the Negritude movement, which was a movement of Black people in Francophone countries in Africa and the Caribbean, to their main purpose, or one of the main things that they did was challenging these white supremacist ideas in academia, in science, in literature, pretty much every field. And in this 30-page, actually it's less than 30 pages, it's like 20, 23, 24. In this 24-page piece, Césaire deals with all these structures of colonialism in terms of religion, in terms of science, in terms of literature, academia, every possible justification for colonialism. Césaire very poetically, very succinctly, just sets fire to every single colonialist idea that's out there. And one of my favorite things about this is that he mentions um, a lot of pro-colonialist, or put more bluntly, like a lot of colonizers by name. So I'll get to that in a second. Uh, but I'm just going to start with this one paragraph that's um, on the first page. Césaire says, the fact is that the so-called European civilization, Western civilization, as it has been shaped by 2 centuries of bourgeois rule, is incapable of solving the two major problems to which its existence has given rise: the problem of the proletariat and the colonial problem. That Europe is unable to justify itself either before the bar of reason or before the bar of conscience, and that increasingly it takes refuge in a hypocrisy which is all the more odious because it is less and less likely to deceive. So the Césaire is very succinctly put it, uniting these two questions um, of capitalism and colonialism, and showing that they're created by the same people. These structures are created by and ultimately benefit the same people, and that there's no stability to colonialism and to capitalism. That these are structures that are decaying, structures that are dying, and the closer they get to death, the more hypocritical, the more cynical, and the more ugly they become. And that's essentially um, the thesis of this entire piece. Um, so on page 3, um, just as a refutation of this idea that because uh, Césaire was writing this in 1955 at a time when the French were brutally suppressing people in all of their in all the French colonies, most particularly in Algeria. Um, so there's um, this quote that I'd like to read out. Um, Whether one likes it or not, at the end of the blind alley that is Europe, I mean the Europe of Adenauer, Schumann, Bidault, and a few others, there is Hitler. At the end of capitalism, which is eager to outlive its day, there is Hitler. At the end of formal humanism and philosophic renunciation, there is Hitler. So the politicians that he's calling out by name, these are French prime ministers and German. One of them is a German chancellor. These are people who, um, at least on paper, resisted the Nazis, and actually um, lived through Nazi occupation, and then turned around and did the same things and even worse things um, to people in Algeria, people in Senegal, in Madagascar, every country that the French colonized. And what Césaire is saying here is um, there this sort of idea of the uniqueness of Nazism, of like fascism being this unique evil that is miles and miles away from liberalism. He's saying that this is a false idea, because the these liberal politicians are only a few rebellions or a few challenges to their power, um, only a revolution away from becoming Nazis themselves. Um, and he has so many quotes um, that show uh, that show the hypocrisy of these people. who claim to be humanists and who claim to be liberals and care about human rights and all of that stuff, when they're talking uh, about people living in colonies, people in oppressed nations, and in the colonies, they they sound exactly like Nazis. Um, so I'm not gonna uh, go over those quotes, but trust me, there's a lot of racist shit that these French people were saying, which I'm sure to anyone watching this, that's not going to come as a surprise. Um, but I don't know exactly how much time I have left in this, so I'm just gonna try and get through as quickly as possible. Um, so there's a few things that Césaire does uh, in this essay. One of the main things is um, refuting this idea that uh, just refuting all colonialist ideas, but mainly refuting the idea that there is an inferiority to colonized people, to oppressed and colonized people, by talking about how ruthless Europeans have been throughout the history of colonialism. And he talks about how at the beginning of colonization, there was no sort of two-faced justification about it. They were very clear about trying to extract profits from the colonies. Um, and then as time went on, it became a sort of a matter of trying to civilize the savages, trying to spread Christianity all over the world. And all these ideas came up about how the uncivilized were less than human, um, how they couldn't rule themselves, how they couldn't, um, they couldn't be trusted uh, to live side by side with Europeans because there's just something wrong with them. Uh, so Césaire, of course, deals with that beautifully by talking about how communal societies were in Africa and um, how countries like Vietnam had beautiful cultures and scientific systems before colonialism, and even during the age of colonialism, um, when people in colonized countries are asking for schools, they're asking for um, infrastructure. All they get is infrastructure that is built to extract resources from the colonies and take them to Europe. So the idea um, that colonialism is something that causes in progress for the colonized um, is something that Césaire refutes very thoroughly. Um, so I want to move on to on so on page 9. And another thing about Césaire is that the class analysis is also top notch um, in this paper. On page 9, he says, the intrepid class which once stormed the Bastilles is now hamstrung, basically talking about the bourgeoisie who have this whole tradition of liberty and equality in France, now doing worse than what was ever done to them. Um, and, proving that all of that is hypocrisy, and the only thing that they really care about is profit. He also talks about the petty bourgeoisie, these people who are um, the faces of academia, who put out support of eugenics and all kinds of colonialist ideas in every field. Um, he says uh, the petty bourgeoisie's subjective good faith is completely irrelevant to the objective social implications of the evil work they perform as watchdogs of colonialism. So something that Césaire shows in this essay also is that it's so pervasive all these colonialist ideas in French society were so pervasive that they started to seem almost like common sense. Of course, uh, human beings are not equal. Of course, the uh, the non-white people of the world are not able to rule or govern themselves. Of course, it's just um, for France to be murdering people in Algeria and detaining and torturing and keeping people in poverty in their colonies all over the world because they are the enlightened um, superior human beings. Um, so Césaire moves through all of that, cuts through all of that, and gets to the point that colonialism is just about profit. It's not about trying to benefit the colonized. Um, it's just purely about extraction and exploitation. Um, so on page 17, Césaire talks more about the rise of fascism. He says that the bourgeoisie is condemned to become every day more snarling, more openly ferocious, more shameless, and more summarily barbarous. So um, just by doing what they do, by extracting and exploiting as much as they do, the bourgeoisie cannot, they're incapable of living up to the ideals that they profess to live up to believe in. They're incapable of actually embodying liberty and equality because their position as the bourgeoisie, their position as the receivers of all this wealth that's being stolen and and created by slaves throughout the world, that position is threatened by the actual equality in practice. Um, so that quote that I just read out was on page 17. I can probably, uh, I think I'll be able to post this in the chat after I'm done speaking. Um, so so Césaire talks there about the rise of fascism, and as that quote earlier shows, the whole idea of Western society, as of course it's ruled by the bourgeoisie, is a direct road to fascism. And for as long as these people have as long as they keep doing what they're doing, and as long as people resist what they're doing, as long as the colonized actually resist that, then um, they're just going to keep getting worse. And there's another quote that I kind of skipped over, but I want to read this because it's kind of relevant to the uprising that happened last year. On page 15, there is Césaire is being sort of sarcastic and just uh, talking about a different some French academic. I'm not exactly sure what his name is. Um, Césaire says these Negroes can't even imagine what freedom is. I'm sorry. These Negroes can't even imagine what freedom is. They don't want it. They don't demand it. It's the white agitators who put that into their heads. And if you gave it to them, they wouldn't know what to do with it. So this idea of outside agitators, it's been a very heavily pushed anti-communist idea for decades. Even in the civil rights movement, the KKK was saying that um, it was communists who were telling black people that they needed to be free and that black people didn't actually want an end to Jim Crow. And it's the same kind of thing saying that black people didn't actually want an end to colonialism, and that um, it's just outside agitators putting that idea into their heads. So it's racist and it's anti-communist, and of course, racism and anti-communism, go hand in hand. Um, and the corollary to that is that um, at the same time, uh, or at least before that, the USSR actually was helping anti-colonial struggles, um, because that as communists, that is what we do. We unite with liberation struggles all over the world. So even though it was a red baiting anti-communist uh, rhetoric that he's responding to, um, it is the there is no capitalist solution to inequality. Um, the we have to through united struggle fight back against white supremacy and against capitalism. So the last quote that I'll read is actually the final paragraph of Discourse on Colonialism. Actually, let's do the final two paragraphs. Or actually, I mean, the way that Césaire writes, and I hope, please read this. Um, the way that Césaire writes, it's actually kind of difficult to understand one part without the other parts. Um, but there was a part that I kind of skipped over, um, which is that with the fall of Europe, Césaire talks about American imperialism. He says that American high finance considers that the time has come to raid every colony in the world, and this is on page 23. So with it's still the same sort of violence that the idea of the West has created, that's going to turn into America just pillaging countries all around the world, which has of course was happening at the time that Césaire wrote this, and has happened only to a greater extent since then. So since it's kind of late, I'm just gonna read the final paragraph, um, which comes down to saying that the salvation of Europe is not a matter of revolution and methods; it's a matter of the revolution, revolution with a capital R, the one which, until such time as there is a classless society, will substitute for the narrow tyranny of a dehumanized bourgeoisie the preponderance of the only class that still has a universal mission, because it suffers in its flesh from all the wrongs of history, from all the universal wrongs, the proletariat. So, what Césaire is saying is that the only thing that can save Europe from fascism and from increased destruction, the destruction of colonialism turning more and more inward, is a proletarian revolution. Um, and I think that's an amazing place to end this essay on, by saying that there is actually a way forward. There is actually we don't have to accept the fact that millions of people um, are gonna keep dying the way that it's been in the past, but that revolution is the way forward, and that this revolution is possible. Um, so I'm saying that there's no questions so far, but if anyone has questions, I would love to hear them, or just comments. I am kind of reading the comments on Facebook, which is kind of why I'm so distracted. I probably shouldn't have done that. But if you have any questions, I would love to hear them, and I'll be here for as long as I need to until I can get these questions answered. Okay. Uh, there's actually one comment that I kind of want to that I want to talk about from uh, from Michael Olson. This reminds me of an anecdote someone once told me that I don't know if it's true, if this is true, where the heads of the Communist Party in South Africa said they feared black nationalists pushing them into the sea, and the International saying something like, "Maybe, but if you refuse to support them, what do you think we will do?" Yeah, so that was actually in Black Bolshevik, or it was talked about in Black Bolshevik. Um, the heads of the SACP, were all white. They came to the Congress of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union, and they, they pretended like they didn't, or they believed that they, as an all-white organization, could actually liberate South Africa, which is a majority black country. And the the response of the Soviets was, well, yeah, if you ignore black people, if you ignore the demands of black liberation, then you might get thrown into the sea. So I just love that anecdote. Um, so what other works by Biko do you recommend? Honestly, this is I've just been reading this over and over again. I honestly haven't read anything else that's directly by Steve Biko. Um, as far as I know, he didn't write any standalone books because um, he was he was killed very young. He was a youth organizer. Um, but I'm sure there are works by Steve Biko that I haven't read, and that's a good question because I do need to uh, read more from Steve Biko. And what questions can revolutionaries in the United States learn from the theorists you spoke about today? So the main from Steve Biko, I think the main thing is that um, you know the struggle for Black liberation is a struggle for self determination. I think the same thing is true, everywhere in the world, and it's definitely true in the U.S. That we're not just fighting for a seat at a white supremacist table. We're fighting for um, something that benefits the masses of Black people, which is political power in the hands of Black people. Um, so, as a an oppressed nation within the U.S., that's something that Black people need, and that not enough, uh, you know, socialists, communists, uh, any people who not enough people who claim to believe in Black liberation are willing to stand by that principle of Black self determination. So that's definitely something that we can learn from Biko, and the same lesson is there in Césaire's work, but I think more pointedly is you know because I spoke about this earlier, this idea that that fascism is sort of this unique evil that is completely divorced from capitalism and from colonialism. But Césaire shows very succinctly that fascism is the direct result of those evils, of those evil systems, and we're not gonna um, we're not gonna stop the rise of fascism if we don't acknowledge the fact that um, that it's the inevitable result of capitalism and or not inevitable, but that it's is if uh, if the bourgeoisie have their way, for an extended period of time, without a revolution happening, then we will experience fascism over and over again, because there's no built-in fail-safes to prevent fascism within capitalism, because fascism is capitalism in decay. Um, when the bourgeoisie sees itself about to be overthrown or about to lose some of its power, that's when they resort to fascism. Um, and I think that, like, in this day and age, this historical moment that we're in right now in the U.S., wherein we have fascists storming the U.S. Capitol. We have fascists organizing, around the country to beat people up in the streets. I think that's something that we have to keep in mind. That eventually we need a revolution if we're gonna stop fascism. Um, and another question: are either author's works available online, or do you need to find a hard copy? Um, so the Césaire reading is available online. I can actually, I don't know who to send this to. I'll see if I can post this in the chat right now. Actually, um, this is some I kind of find it hard to read, to like focus on PDFs, but I also don't really have the money to be buying that many books. So I'm just gonna post. Yeah, so I'm just gonna post this in the chat. The Steve Biko readings, I don't know if they're available online. I hope they are. I think they are. You might uh, be more able to find them, separately as separate essays instead of finding the whole book. So if you search for the book and find uh, find the essays, find the table of contents, you might be able to find those essays. Okay. So I think that's all the questions. Thank you everyone for being here. Uh, I hope y'all read further on this, and I will definitely uh, read more on this. And once again, share this video, share all FRSO stuff. Join FRSO if you're not in it already. Join the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. I love you all. All power to the people. Thanks for being here. Oh yeah, and this isn't the last live stream for Black History Month. We're having a study Sunday next week. I think Monique Sampson is actually doing that one. It's gonna be great. I'll be watching. You should watch as well. And stay tuned to all the FRSO social media. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're out here, and of course we're in the streets. Um, March 8th, we're having protest. The National Alliance is having protests nationally, so tune into those as well. Yeah, thank you all. I'm not doing the tech stuff, so I don't know if I'm still live or not. I hope I'm not because I'm kind of rambling right now.